Here is the full story, naturally readapted for an American English long-form YouTube voiceover. It flows smooth, candid, and dramatic, while remaining clean, TTS-friendly, and safe for AI generation. My name is Ruby. 13 years ago, inside the living room of my supposedly respectable suburban family, my parents banned me from celebrating my 20th birthday. Their reason was as absurd as it was cruel. My older sister simply didn't feel special enough that day. They threw my birthday cake, the beautiful standard vanilla cake I'd paid for with my own saved tips, straight into the trash can covered in coffee grounds. Then they ordered me to cancel all my dinner plans just to nurse her through a 3-week breakup with some guy she barely knew. That exact night, I packed a canvas duffel bag with a few changes of clothes and walked straight out into a bitter Chicago blizzard. I had $50 in my pocket. They were convinced I'd fail. They were certain the real world would crush me, and that I'd come crawling back like a beaten dog, begging for their financial handouts and their conditional version of love. They were wrong. I never went back. Instead, I built a private business empire far beyond their tiny, limited imaginations. So 13 years later, when they tried to leverage me once again to fund my sister's fake luxury lifestyle, I didn't just say no. I decided to burn their illusion of perfection to the ground. I'm 33 now. For as long as I can remember, I was the invisible daughter in the wealthy North Shore suburbs of Chicago. My parents, Patricia and Richard, spent their entire lives obsessing over a flawless American middle-class image. They drove luxury sedans bought on finance, hosted elegant block party dinners on manicured lawns, and packaged our family as the absolute gold standard of the American dream. Behind our heavy oak front door, the reality was suffocating. Every drop of emotional and financial support went straight to my older sister, Brittany. Brittany was the golden child. She could do no wrong. Even the most mediocre achievement was met with lavish gifts and celebrations. My hard work, on the other hand, was ignored. I learned very early that my role in the family was to stay quiet, follow instructions, and serve as a convenient backdrop to make Brittany shine. That toxic dynamic was on full display last Saturday night. Out of nowhere, my parents invited me to dinner at a high-end steakhouse in downtown Chicago. I should have known better. We rarely speak, and whenever they reach out, it's usually because they need something from me. But a small, foolish part of me hoped maybe this time would be different. Maybe at 33, I had finally earned a seat at their table as an equal. I was completely wrong. The restaurant was intimidatingly expensive. The kind of place reserved for Wall Street execs and trust fund kids. The lighting was low, the leather booths swallowed you whole, and the servers moved like quiet shadows. The air smelled of old oak, expensive cologne, and high-grade Wagyu. I arrived right on time, wearing a simple black dress and keeping a low profile. Brittany arrived 20 minutes late, making a dramatic scene that forced neighboring tables to turn around. She was draped in high-end brand logos. Though with my years in the luxury industry, I strongly suspected they were high-grade knockoffs. The moment she sat down, she claimed the best seat at the table. I sat back and observed. I ordered a basic chicken dish and a glass of tap water. I listened as my father, Richard, grandly ordered a dry-aged tomahawk steak with 2 sides of truffle mac and cheese. I watched my mother, Patricia, summon the head sommelier with an arrogant snap of her fingers. Brittany took over the wine list, ordering 3 bottles of vintage champagne without hesitation, loudly declaring that we needed to celebrate her upcoming wedding properly. I didn't touch a single drop of that champagne. I just smiled politely, cut my food, and spent the next 2 hours listening to them talk endlessly about themselves. Brittany ran the conversation, boasting about her life as a top luxury real estate agent. She went on and on about the high-end mansions she claimed to be showing, the elite clients she was entertaining, and her unbelievably wealthy fiancé, Harrison, who was supposedly handling an urgent corporate merger on the West Coast. My parents hung on her every word. They nodded eagerly, asked for every tiny detail about the wedding, and showered her with praise. Ouch. Whenever I tried to chime in and share a minor update about my own life, my mother would give me a brief, tight smile and instantly steer the topic back to Brittany. I had given up trying to prove my worth to them a long time ago. In their eyes, I was still the broke, struggling girl they pushed out 13 years ago. Ouch. They were convinced I was still scraping by, running a tiny, low-end cleaning gig and surviving in a rundown rental. I never corrected them. I never told them that my modest cleaning startup had evolved through years of strategic expansion into a massive property management firm, eventually becoming Pinnacle Estate Holdings. Ouch. I never mentioned that I now run a multi-million-dollar empire specializing in asset management for ultra-high net worth individuals, overseeing the exact multi-million-dollar estates Brittany could only dream of listing. I kept my financial success completely hidden. In this family, my privacy was my armor against their endless judgment. Ouch. As the main courses were cleared and the last drops of champagne were poured into Brittany's glass, a server in a black vest walked over. He laid a heavy leather bill presenter in the center of the table, right next to the flickering candle. The loud conversation came to a sudden halt. A heavy silence settled over the table. This was the real reason for the dinner. Ouch. My mother picked up the leather folder. She opened it and scanned the line items. I watched her face, looking for even a hint of hesitation, but there was none. She didn't even blink at the outrageous total. Then, with a smooth, practiced movement, she slid the folder across the white tablecloth, landing it right in front of my plate. I looked down. Ouch. Printed in bold at the bottom was the total. $200. I looked up and met my mother's gaze. Patricia crossed her arms with a condescending, patronizing smile. Since you're single, living in a rental, and running that little cleaning operation, you obviously don't have real living expenses, she said, her voice carrying an absolute, unquestionable authority. Ouch. Your sister is saving for a massive wedding, so you're taking care of tonight's bill. The sheer nerve of her statement hung in the air. She wasn't asking for help. She was issuing an order. She fully expected me to drain my bank account to cover a lavish feast I barely participated in, all to fund my sister's vanity. Richard drank his coffee without looking up. Ouch. Brittany pretended to inspect her fresh French manicure, hiding a small smirk. It was a setup. They assumed that in a high-end venue like this, I'd pay up just to avoid making a scene. They thought I'd hand over my credit card to keep the peace, just like I used to. But I wasn't that scared 20-year-old girl anymore. A wave of absolute calm washed over me. Ouch. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, and I felt none of the old familiar pain. Just cold, clear clarity. I placed my hand on the leather folder, looked at the $2,200 total one last time, and quietly closed it. I slid it back across the table, placing it directly in front of my mother. Ouch. I'll cover my chicken and my glass of tap water, I said smoothly, keeping my voice low so only our table could hear. But I'm not paying a single cent for 3 bottles of vintage champagne I didn't drink, or a tomahawk steak I didn't order. Patricia gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she'd been physically struck. Are you out of your mind? She hissed, leaning across the table. Ouch. Her eyes widened in utter disbelief that I dared to say no. We are your family. You are being unbelievably selfish right now. I call it financial responsibility, I replied calmly. You ordered the champagne, Mom. You pay for it. The atmosphere shifted instantly from fake celebration to pure hostility. The illusion of a happy family shattered, exposing their greed and entitlement. Ouch. They had brought me here to act as an ATM, and my refusal to play the victim completely ruined their script. I leaned back, resting my hands in my lap, waiting for the inevitable outburst. Richard finally set his coffee cup down. He glared at me with the familiar, harsh expression that used to terrify me as a child. You're embarrassing us, he muttered, his voice laced with heavy frustration. Ouch. Don't cause a scene in a place like this, Pull out your card right now. I looked him straight in the eyes, refusing to look away or apologize. Nobody is causing a scene, Dad, I said quietly, my tone razor sharp. I'm simply refusing to pay a bill that isn't mine. George, if your bank account can't support the lifestyle you're trying to project tonight, you shouldn't have booked a table here in the first place. Brittany let out an exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes. She leaned forward, the large stone on her hand catching the dim light, ready to launch her attack. This argument was about to go way beyond an unpaid dinner check. George. Brittany let out a sharp, bitter laugh that sounded like cracking glass. She tossed her linen napkin onto the table and glared at me with pure, unfiltered hostility. You're still bitter about your stupid 20th birthday party, aren't you? She crossed her arms and leaned back into the soft leather booth. It's been 13 years, Ruby. For God's sake, grow up. George. Stop holding on to such petty grudges just to punish us. Just hearing her mention that night sent a cold chill straight through me, pulling me instantly back into the past. 13 years ago, the Chicago air was bone-chillingly cold, cutting right through my thin coat. But as I walked up the driveway to our suburban home, I felt hopeful. It was my 20th birthday. George. I had just worked a double shift as a waitress at a local diner, saving every penny of my tips to pay for my college textbooks. My body was exhausted, and my feet ached from standing all day. But I was smiling because my mother had promised a small family dinner. She had promised to cut the vanilla cream cake she ordered from my favorite bakery. George. I had even invited 3 of my closest friends to come over an hour later to celebrate. When I pushed open the heavy front door, the house was dead silent. No warm lights in the dining room, no smell of dinner cooking. I walked down the long hallway in my heavy winter coat. When I reached the kitchen island, I froze. George. That beautiful vanilla cream cake, with "Happy Birthday, Ruby," written in delicate pink frosting, was sitting upside down in the stainless steel trash can. It was completely smashed, covered in wet coffee grounds and trash. I stood there, staring at my ruined cake, trying desperately to process what I was looking at. Then I heard dramatic sobbing coming from the living room. George. I walked in and found Brittany lying across the expensive beige sofa, surrounded by a mountain of used tissues. My mother was sitting beside her, gently stroking her hair and comforting her. What happened? I asked, my voice trembling as I pointed toward the kitchen. Why is my birthday cake in the trash? Patricia looked up, her expression turning from gentle comfort to absolute irritation. George. Keep it down, she snapped aggressively at me. Brittany is going through a terrible time right now. Jason just broke up with her. I stared at them, completely stunned by the absurdity. Jason was a guy Brittany had been casually seeing for less than 3 weeks. I'm sorry she's upset, I said, trying desperately to hold back tears. But Mom, why did you throw my cake away? George. My friends are coming over in an hour. You need to call your friends right now and cancel, Patricia said in a firm tone that allowed no argument. We aren't having a party tonight, Ruby. Your sister is in terrible pain and you thinking about celebrating right now is completely insensitive. George. Your sister doesn't feel special today, and watching you open presents and cut cake will only make her feel worse. Standing in the middle of that living room, I felt the ground drop beneath me. It was my 20th birthday. I had worked all day, and all I wanted was one evening to feel valued in my own home. But once again, my existence was an inconvenience. George. My happiness was treated as a direct threat to Brittany's fragile ego. I'm not canceling my plans, I whispered, my voice raspy. It's my birthday. Patricia stood up, full of self-righteous anger. She marched over to the entryway table where a few wrapped gifts from my aunt and uncle were sitting. She grabbed them, walked over to the sofa, and tossed them directly onto Brittany's lap. George. Give these to your sister to help her feel better, Patricia ordered without a shred of empathy. If you can't be a supportive member of this family, you don't deserve to live under this roof. I didn't argue. I didn't cry or beg for their love. I calmly walked upstairs to my bedroom, grabbed a canvas duffel bag, and stuffed in as many clothes as I could fit. Ouch. That night, I stepped out into the freezing Chicago winter with $50 in my pocket and nowhere to go. I knew one thing for certain: I would never return to a place where my worth was determined by my sister's mood. The sharp, aggressive clinking of a silver fork against a crystal glass snapped me right back to the present. My father was tapping his glass, demanding attention. Porch. His face was flush dark red, and the veins on his neck were visible over his tailored collar. "Your sister is completely right, Ruby." He raised his voice, leaning his large frame across the table toward me. "You're acting like a stubborn, spoiled child. Holding on to this ridiculous grudge for over a decade is pathetic. Porch, we invited you tonight out of kindness to share in Brittany's happiness, and this is how you repay us?" I looked at my father, feeling a deep sense of sadness for his willful ignorance. "You invited me here to cover your bill, Dad," I corrected him calmly, looking him dead in the eye. "There's a clear line between family inclusion and financial exploitation." Porch. Richard slammed his hand onto the table, making the heavy silverware rattle against the porcelain plates. "Don't you dare speak to me with that condescending tone," he warned, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Apologize to your sister right now. She is preparing for the biggest day of her life, dealing with the massive stress of planning a high-society wedding. And you? Porch. You do nothing all day except dwell on your own failures." He paused, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "Look at you. 33 years old, moving between cheap rentals, surviving on pennies from that little property management gig. You should be grateful we even let you sit at a table like this. You make a living cleaning up after other people, Ruby." Porch. "Meanwhile, your sister is a top luxury real estate agent dealing with multi-million-dollar homes. She works with high-profile clients who actually matter. You should learn from her instead of embarrassing us in public." The pure comedy of his statement was almost too much to handle. There he sat in his tailored suit, looking down his nose at me, completely convinced I was a total failure. Porch. He had no idea that my little property management gig was actually Pinnacle Estate Holdings. He had no clue I employed over 200 people, or that my company managed real estate portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in the Midwest. He didn't know that my understated designer dress cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Porch. And he certainly didn't know that I lived in a secure penthouse overlooking the entire Chicago skyline. He blindly believed the pathetic story they had invented about me because it made them comfortable. It preserved their fragile illusion that Brittany was the successful golden child, and I was the cautionary tale. I let him speak. Porch. I let him insult my career and belittle my life choices because every word he spoke only made my upcoming move colder and more decisive. "I'm not apologizing to anyone tonight," I said, keeping my voice quiet, smooth, and dangerously calm. "And I'm definitely not taking career advice from someone who relies on an estranged daughter to cover his luxury dinner." Porch. Brittany gasped dramatically, clutching her chest as if my words were a physical blow. She looked at our parents with wide, teary eyes, playing the victim perfectly. It was her signature move. Whenever she felt challenged, she immediately weaponized her emotions to turn our parents against me. "Mom," she sobbed softly, putting on a show of distress. Porch. I can't believe she's talking to me like this. Tonight was supposed to be about my engagement. It was supposed to be a celebration of my new life with Harrison, and she completely ruined it, just like she ruins everything she touches. Patricia grabbed Brittany's hand, glaring at me with intense anger. "It's okay, sweetie," she cooed gently, stroking Brittany's arm. Porch. "Don't let her negative energy ruin your moment. You have so much to be proud of. You have a brilliant, successful fiancé and a beautiful, wealthy future waiting for you." Brittany sniffled, wiping away a fake tear from her cheek. She took a deep breath, sat up straight, and a triumphant smile slowly replaced her hurt expression. "Porch, She realized that my refusal to pay gave her the perfect opportunity to pull the spotlight right back onto her grand achievements. She was ready to drop her big announcement, and she wanted to make sure it hit my self-esteem as hard as possible. She cleared her throat loudly, making sure the surrounding tables could hear her vital news. Porch. Brittany stood up, tapping her knife against her crystal glass. The sharp sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant, causing nearby guests to quiet down. She soaked in the attention, raising her left hand high for everyone to see. The warm lights caught massive stones sitting on her ring finger. She rotated her wrist gracefully, letting the facets catch the glow of the chandeliers. Porch. My mother gasped in admiration, covering her mouth with both hands. My father nodded solemnly with pride. Sitting just a few feet away, I saw the truth instantly. In my line of work, dealing with high net worth assets every single day, I know what real wealth looks like. I know how a genuine high-grade diamond handles light. Porch. The massive stone on her finger threw off a harsh rainbow glare. A dead giveaway. It was cubic zirconia. A cheap fake ring hiding a hollow reality. I sat there in silence, taking it all in while she proudly paraded a piece of glass as if it were a rare treasure. Brittany looked down at me with a smirk. Porch. As you all know, Harrison and I have been planning our future, she began loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Harrison is finalizing a massive corporate merger, but he wanted me to share our incredible news tonight. He knows how hard I work, so he wanted to reward my dedication with something extraordinary. My mother leaned forward, her eyes brimming with tears. Porch. Oh, sweetie, Patricia said, her voice shaking. We're so happy for you. You deserve a man who recognizes your worth. Richard gave a low nod of approval, taking a sip of wine. He knows how to treat a high-class woman. He's a real provider, unlike the lazy types who expect women to carry the weight. Brittany fed off their endless praise. Porch. She paused dramatically to build suspense before delivering her carefully calculated blow. Next weekend, we're officially hosting our engagement party at a brand new $12 million lakefront estate in Lake Forest. Harrison bought the entire property outright with cash as an early wedding gift for me. So we'll never have to worry about a mortgage. The table erupted into celebration. Porch. Patricia let out a high-pitched squeal, while Richard stood up to pull Brittany into a proud hug. A $12 million estate bought with full cash, Richard repeated, savoring the words like a sacred chant. That's unbelievable, Brittany. We always knew you were destined for greatness, but this exceeds our highest expectations. You've secured our family legacy. Porch. They were so busy congratulating each other that they didn't even bother to look my way. I sat completely still, hands folded quietly in my lap, listening to the impossible numbers coming out of her mouth. Finally, Brittany pulled back from our father's hug. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out her smartphone, unlocked it, and pulled up her photo gallery. Porch. She shoved the screen right into my face, forcing me to look at the photo. Take a good look, Ruby, she sneered, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper meant only for me. This is the kind of life a real wealthy man provides for the woman he loves. This is what real success looks like. Porch. I know it's way beyond your comprehension, considering you spend your days doing manual labor for minimum wage, but try your best to process it. This is my new home. I looked down at the bright screen. For a split second, my heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The photo on the screen was a striking wide-angle professional shot of an ultra-modern luxury estate. Porch. I saw the long, curved driveway paved with imported gray cobblestone. I saw the soaring white limestone exterior glowing under the evening sky. I saw the massive custom wrought iron double doors and the floor-to-ceiling glass windows offering an unobstructed view of Lake Michigan. It was the property at 4200 Shoreline Drive. I didn't just recognize this house from a magazine or a website. Porch. I knew every single inch of that space. I knew the exact origin of the Italian marble used on the kitchen island. I knew the precise layout of the radiant floor heating system in the master bath. I knew these details because I was the one who personally selected every single item in that house. That $12 million estate didn't belong to Harrison. And it certainly didn't belong to my sister, George. It belonged to Pinnacle Estate Holdings. It was the crown jewel of my company's luxury portfolio. The property was currently vacant, fully staged with high-end rental furniture, waiting for a private showing later this month with an international tech billionaire. Nobody lived there. Nobody had bought it. And certainly no man named Harrison had paid $12 million in cash for it. George. A wave of fierce protective anger surged inside me. But years of navigating high-stakes corporate real estate negotiations had taught me total emotional discipline. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp or show shock. I kept my face completely neutral, polite, and impassive. George. I looked at the photograph again while my mind processed the logical possibilities with cold efficiency. How on earth did my sister get inside my locked, high-security property to take these private interior shots? The answer came together almost instantly. Brittany was a struggling, desperate real estate agent. George. She had standard access to the regional MLS system, giving her the digital lockbox codes agents use to show vacant properties to legitimate buyers. Nobody had gifted her a $12 million house. She had simply stolen the security code, trespassed onto a high-value corporate asset, and taken photos to fake a luxurious life she could never afford. George. I slowly pushed her phone away from my face and gave her a calm, peaceful smile. A smile that clearly unnerved her. "It's a gorgeous property, Brittany," I said, my voice steady, without a trace of the bitterness she was desperate to see. "You must be so proud of yourself for landing such a catch. Honestly, I can't wait to see the place in person next weekend." George. Brittany narrowed her eyes, searching my face for jealousy, but found only quiet, composed indifference. Annoyed, she snatched her phone back, tossed her hair, and sat back down. She had no idea that she had just handed me the ultimate weapon to dismantle her entire web of lies. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I didn't stay for dessert. George. Shortly after Britt's grand display, I politely excused myself, claiming an early morning business meeting I couldn't miss. My mother rolled her eyes, muttering about my lack of family loyalty, while my father waved me off without looking up, eager to continue discussing Brittany's newfound elite status. I walked out of the steakhouse and took a breath of the crisp night air. George. The valet brought my car to the curb. Not a rusted sedan, but a sleek, custom black executive vehicle with dark privacy glass. I slid into the driver's seat and merged smoothly into the city lights, leaving their empty vanity far behind in my rearview mirror. I navigated the familiar streets, turning into the private, climate-controlled underground garage of my downtown high-rise. George. I walked directly to the private elevator reserved for penthouse residents, placing my thumb on the biometric scanner. The polished steel doors slid open seamlessly, and the elevator shot straight to the top floor. When the doors opened, I stepped directly into my private foyer. It was a vast penthouse with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the entire Chicago skyline. George. The city lights flickered below like a blanket of diamonds. I walked through the spacious living room, running my hand along the back of a custom velvet sofa. Every piece of furniture, every original artwork on the walls, and every luxury fixture in this space was bought with my own hard-earned money. Years ago, they were convinced I would fail without them. George. They believed cutting off their support would force me to crawl back, begging for forgiveness just for wanting basics respect. As it turned out, their cruelty was the greatest gift they ever gave me. That intensity ignited a fierce, unstoppable drive deep in my chest. I didn't have a trust fund or a wealthy network to lean on, so I had to climb up from the absolute bottom of society. George. My very first job was cleaning houses for wealthy families in those affluent suburbs. I spent over 12 hours a day on my knees, scrubbing their marble floors and wiping down their custom kitchen countertops. But while doing that hard manual labor, I paid close attention to how they lived and how they built their wealth. I saved every single dollar I earned. Porch. I lived in a tiny rundown rental, survived on cheap, instant noodles, and taught myself everything about the real estate market piece by piece. Eventually, I transitioned from cleaning houses to managing them. I learned how to deal with contractors, negotiate lease agreements, and oversee major home renovations. Porch. When the market hit a slump, I took a massive, terrifying risk and used all my savings to buy a small, foreclosed property. I renovated it myself, flipped it quickly for a profit, and immediately reinvested that capital back into the market. That is how I built my commercial empire, brick by brick, deal by deal, until it evolved into what is now Pinnacle Estate Holdings. Porch. Today, my company does far more than just manage properties. We acquire, develop, and hold some of the most exclusive and coveted premier real estate across the American Midwest. We specialize in serving ultra-high net worth individuals, corporate executives, and international investors who demand absolute perfection and complete privacy. Porch. For the past decade, my parents and my sister have been aggressively brainwashing themselves into believing I was a pathetic, struggling failure. Admitting the alternative, that I achieved massive success entirely on my own without a single dime of their help, would completely shatter their fragile worldview. I walked into my spacious home office and turned on the soft ambient lights. Porch. I sat down in my ergonomic executive leather chair and brought up my heavily encrypted work laptop. I wasn't angry anymore. The initial shock I felt at the restaurant had completely evaporated, replaced by a hyper-focused tactical mindset. I needed hard, undeniable facts to figure out exactly how Brittany had pulled off this absurd stunt. Porch. I opened Pinnacle Estate Holdings' proprietary internal database. The system tracks every single asset in our vast luxury portfolio, including acquisition dates, staging details, security access logs, and current market status. I pulled the keyboard closer and typed in the address my sister had proudly shoved in my face earlier that evening. 4200 Shoreline Drive, Lake Forest. Porch. I hit enter and waited for the system to query the server. A detailed dossier immediately popped up on the screen. My holding company acquired the estate 8 months ago outright. Porch. Over the last 6 months, we poured a massive amount of capital into a meticulous top-to-bottom renovation, upgrading the full smart home system, installing high-end imported finishes, and turning the backyard into a resort-style oasis. The property was currently listed on the private luxury market for exactly $12 million. Porch. The house was fully furnished, but every single piece was rented from an exclusive staging firm to show potential billionaire buyers the space's incredible potential. Nobody lived there. No offers had been accepted. The deed to the house was held firmly by Pinnacle Estate Holdings, and I was the sole authorized signatory for any potential ownership transfer. Harrison hadn't bought this property. Porch. He hadn't paid millions in cash. My sister was blatantly lying to our parents, lying to her friends, and very likely lying to her own fiancé. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping rhythmically on the smooth desk. The sheer nerve of her scam was almost unbelievable. Porch. But publicly claiming ownership of a $12 million estate that didn't belong to her went far beyond pathetic vanity. It crossed into dangerously illegal territory. I leaned closer to the screen and pulled up the properties showing instructions. Because this was a premier high-value asset, it was never listed on the public MLS for the general public. It was an exclusive pocket listing. Porch. Only a handful of vetted top-tier luxury agents were granted specific digital lockbox codes to show the home to legitimate high-net-worth private clients. Brittany worked at a local boutique brokerage that occasionally crossed paths with this tier of real estate. Porch. She must have leveraged her position at the firm, using the excuse of showing the house to a wealthy buyer to request a secure access code. She was strutting around my marble kitchen, taking selfies by my infinity pool, and convincing everyone around her that she was a newly minted multimillionaire. A cold smile slowly crept onto my lips as a brilliant plan began to take shape in my mind. Brittany wanted to play a high-stakes game of real estate monopoly with a property that actually belonged to me. She wanted to throw a lavish engagement party in a house where she was nothing more than a trespasser. I quietly closed the property file on my computer, but I didn't log out. I slowly reached for my sleek smartphone sitting at the edge of the desk. I didn't need to confront her directly or cause a public scene. I just needed to let her keep digging her own hole, deeper and deeper, until the weight of the truth collapsed in on her. I unlocked my phone and speed-dialed the direct number for my corporate security chief. It was time to execute phase 1 of my response. I listened to the steady rings as I held the phone to my ear. Even though it was late on a Saturday night, Pinnacle Estate Holdings operated around the clock. Michael picked up on the second ring. He was the head of corporate security, running my department with military precision to protect my assets, my clients, and my peace of mind. "Good evening, Ms. Ruby," he answered, his voice crisp and sharp, despite the hour. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call." "You guessed right, Michael," I replied, leaning back and gazing at the Chicago skyline. "I need you to pull the complete digital access logs for the Lake Forest property on Shoreline Drive immediately. Go back 3 weeks and tell me what you find." I could hear the rapid clack of key switches on his end. He didn't ask a single question about why I was suddenly investigating this specific address. He just executed the order cleanly. "Stand by," he said, "querying the lockbox data now." I waited in the selflessness of my penthouse. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the loud, obnoxious bragging I had endured an hour ago at the steakhouse. "All right." Michael's tone shifted slightly. "This is interesting. Since it's a pocket listing, access is strictly restricted. But we've got an external broker code hitting the front door repeatedly over the last 20 days. These entries are completely outside standard showing hours, mostly late at night on weekends, sometimes extending past midnight." My grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Who does the code belong to, Michael?" More keyboard clicks echoed through the speaker. "The credential belongs to a luxury agent named Brittany from a local boutique agency we occasionally work with. According to the smart home sensors inside, the HVAC and interior lighting were repeatedly altered during these unauthorized visits. The system also flagged unusual water usage. Judging by these utility spikes, she's using the property frequently, maybe even hosting private gatherings inside." A cold rush of satisfaction washed over me. Brittany wasn't just taking fake pictures for social media. She was actively squatting on my $12 million corporate asset. She was treating it like her personal playground, throwing dinner parties, inviting her shallow friends over, and drinking wine over my imported Italian marble countertops to fuel her grand illusion. "This is a massive liability, Ruby." Michael's voice turned severe. "She's putting a high-value asset at risk. If an unauthorized guest damages the property, it's an insurance nightmare. I can dispatch a private security detail to lock down the estate right now. We can have local law enforcement waiting there to cite her for trespassing the next time she scans that code." It was a tempting offer. The image of my arrogant sister being escorted off my property in handcuffs was deeply satisfying. It would put a swift end to her pathetic stunt. But that was too easy. If I had her removed tonight, my parents would simply twist the narrative and turn her into the victim. They'd claim it was all a huge misunderstanding over broker access rules. They would never see the full scope of her deception, and they would never face consequences for their own enabling behavior. "No, Michael," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Don't call the police, and don't lock her out of the system." There was a brief pause on the line as he processed the instruction. "You want her to keep trespassing?" he asked, surprised. "Ruby, the risk to the property is substantial." "I understand the risk, Michael, but I need to handle this intruder personally. She's planning to throw a massive engagement party at the property next weekend." She's bringing dozens of people into the house to celebrate her fake life. I need her to feel completely secure and confident in this lie. I want her to think she got away with it until the very last second. I paused, my voice hardening. However, I'm not leaving my property unprotected while she plays her games. I need you to send a professional crew to the Lake Forest estate before sunrise tomorrow. Install hidden high-definition security cameras throughout the main floor, covering the grand foyer, the formal dining room, the kitchen, and all main living areas. Michael picked up the directive instantly, switching back to tactical mode. I can have a crew on site by 5 in the morning. We'll use micro cameras disguised in the ceiling crown molding and HVAC vents, completely invisible to the naked eye, but recording full HD audio and video directly to our secure cloud server. Legally, we're fully covered since the property is owned outright by your holding company and classified as a vacant commercial asset. Exactly, I replied. I want every single unauthorized entry documented. I want undeniable video evidence of her bringing cheap rental furniture into my spotless house. I want clear audio of her bragging about owning a house she has zero legal right to occupy. I want a mountain of evidence so solid that even my parents won't be able to make excuses for her. Consider it done, Ruby, Michael said professionally. By tomorrow afternoon, we'll have eyes and ears over the entire main floor. If she so much as scuffs a floorboard or spills a drop of cheap wine on the natural marble, you'll see it on the feed. Do you need anything else set up? One last thing, I said, a small smile touching my lips. I need you to personally oversee the security detail at the property next weekend. There will be a large crowd for her engagement party, and I want to ensure the final removal is executed flawlessly.
I'll be there in person, Michael assured me.
We'll be ready the moment you give the word. I thanked him and ended the call. The trap was set, and the bait was in place. Brittany thought she was smarter than everyone else, pulling off the ultimate scam to lock down her wealthy fiancé and impress our shallow parents. She had no idea she had willingly walked into a fully monitored trap owned by the very sister she had spent her life tormenting. I walked away from my glowing monitor and headed toward my master bedroom. For 13 years, I had carried the heavy weight of their rejection, constantly questioning my self-worth. Now that weight was completely gone. I wasn't that sad, lonely 20-year-old girl crying over a ruined birthday cake anymore. I was a successful, independent woman, and I held all the cards. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long shadows across the floor. I woke up feeling more refreshed than I had in years. I poured a cup of black coffee and watched the city wake up, a deep sense of peace surrounding me. The gears were turning. All I had to do now was wait for the inevitable collision. I didn't have to wait long. At 9 o'clock sharp, my phone buzzed loudly on the granite counter. I glanced at the screen. My mother. I took a slow sip of coffee, let it ring 3 times, and finally answered. I didn't say hello, I just waited for her to speak. Patricia's sharp, accusatory voice came through like a whip. I can't believe you walked out of the restaurant last night without saying a word. You humiliated your father in front of everyone and completely ruined the end of your sister's celebration. We had to make all kinds of excuses for your rudeness. I'm sorry if my early departure embarrassed you, Mom. I kept my voice flat and neutral. I told you I had an important work commitment early this morning. Don't use your little cleaning job as an excuse to disrespect this family, Patricia snapped. Your behavior was selfish, and your father is furious. However, we've decided to give you one last chance to make things right and prove you actually care about your sister. I took another slow sip of coffee. And what exactly do you expect me to do, Mom? Brittany is hosting her engagement party at her new estate next Saturday, Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial pride. It's going to be an extremely high-end event. Harrison's family is flying in, and they have very high standards. You are going to handle the catering. You'll prepare the food, deliver it to the estate, and serve the guests for free, as your personal engagement gift to make up for your awful attitude last night. And let me be clear, Ruby, Patricia added, her tone dropping into a cold threat. If you refuse, or if you cause any trouble at the party, your father and I are done with you. We will write you out of our will completely. Orch, you won't see a single cent of our estate when we're gone. This is your last chance to show some loyalty, do you understand? Listening to her ridiculous ultimatum, a genuine smile spread across my face. She was threatening to disinherit me from an estate I didn't need. Orch. She was trying to use financial leverage against a woman whose company made more in a single quarter than my father had saved in his entire lifetime. The irony was almost poetic, but I needed to play the role of the dutiful daughter a little longer. I understand, Mom, I said, making my voice sound submissive. I'll handle the catering for the party. Orch, I'll bring everything to the estate next Saturday and make sure the food is perfect. You don't have to worry about a thing. Good, Patricia said, her smug satisfaction returning. Remember to use the back service entrance. We don't need you blocking the front door when important guests arrive. Wear plain black clothes so you blend into the background. She hung up without waiting for a reply. Orch. I set the phone on the counter and let out a quiet laugh that echoed through my kitchen. They really thought they held all the power. They thought they had backed me into a corner, forcing me to serve them like staff in a house that I owned. I was more than happy to wear a plain black apron and serve appetizers, because it gave me a front row seat to watch their illusion burn down. Orch. With the catering settled, I walked back to my home office to put the final piece of the puzzle together. While Michael and his team were placing hidden cameras at the estate, another team was working behind the scenes. When you manage assets for billionaires, you need deep financial intelligence. I sat down and opened my encrypted email client. Orch. There was a new message from Ethan, the head of my corporate investigations department. After discovering Brittany's scam the night before, I had instructed Ethan to run a deep background check on her wealthy fiancé, Harrison. If he had actually bought a $12 million estate with cash, his liquid assets would leave an undeniable trail. I needed to know who this man really was. Orch. I clicked the attachment and entered my private decryption key. A 50-page dossier on Harrison opened up. I leaned forward, scanning the executive summary. As I read through the detailed financial breakdown, the truth came together with shocking clarity. Harrison wasn't a multimillionaire. He wasn't a high-powered corporate executive about to close a massive merger. Orch. He didn't have $12 million in cash anywhere in the world. In fact, Harrison had almost nothing. I scrolled down, reviewing the financial disclosures my team had compiled. Harrison's primary business venture had completely collapsed over a year ago, leaving behind a trail of unpaid vendors. He was carrying over $300,000 in hidden business debt. Orch. To maintain his image as a successful businessman, he had maxed out multiple credit cards over the last few months. The luxury car he drove was leased, and he was 3 months behind on the payments. Even his designer suits were purchased on credit. I leaned back, letting the irony sink in. Orch. The cheap cubic zirconia ring Brittany had bragged about at the steakhouse was the absolute limit of what this broke scammer could stretch on his maxed-out credit card. Harrison had been aggressively pursuing my sister because Brittany had convinced him over the last year that she was a wildly successful luxury real estate mogul. Orch. Using her broker credentials, she had taken him on tours of multi-million-dollar homes, claiming they were part of her portfolio. They were scamming each other. Brittany thought she had landed a wealthy provider who would elevate her social status and fund her extravagant dreams forever. Orch. Harrison believed he had secured an independently wealthy real estate heiress who could easily pay off his mountain of secret debt and rescue him from financial ruin. They were two broke, desperate frauds, desperately clinging to each other. Next weekend's engagement party wasn't a celebration of love. It was a disaster waiting to happen when two massive lies collided. Porch. Harrison's family was flying in, expecting to be entertained at a wealthy bride's $12 million estate. My parents were showing up dressed to the nines, expecting a wealthy groom who paid cash for the property to host them. They were all walking blindly into a fragile house of cards built right on top of my property. I closed the file and smiled coldly to myself. Porch. The morning of the engagement party finally arrived, clear and bright. I woke up early, energy humming through my veins. I walked into my closet and bypassed the rows of designer dresses. Instead, I pulled out a plain black cotton shirt and basic black trousers, exactly what my mother had demanded. I tied my hair back into a low, simple bun. I looked in the full-length mirror. Porch. For the role of the invisible, struggling sister, the outfit was perfect. I left my penthouse and drove out to the Lake Forest estate, arriving hours before any guests were scheduled to show up. Marco, the executive chef from a top private catering firm I frequently hired, was already waiting for me at the service entrance. Porch. I had explained the basic setup to him yesterday, and he was more than happy to play along. He brought his best staff and a high-end appetizer menu, far superior to anything my sister could actually afford. We pulled our vehicles into the driveway, parking near the detached garage away from the main entrance. Porch. The estate looked breathtaking in the morning light, its white limestone exterior gleaming against the manicured lawns. I unlocked the service door using my master admin code, letting Marco and his team into the massive commercial kitchen. They went straight to work, unpacking crates of fresh imported ingredients and setting up their prep stations along the wide marble counters. Porch. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching them work efficiently. About an hour later, the roar of a large commercial van echoed up the driveway. I stepped into the grand foyer, just as the custom iron front doors were pushed open. Two exhausted movers carried a tacky mirror, with cheap gold paint into my spotless hallway. Porch. Right behind them was another crew hauling cheap white faux leather couches and flashy mirrored side tables that looked like they were bought at a discount outlet. Brittany had rented the cheapest, most ostentatious party furniture she could find to stage the house for her guests. Porch. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, arms crossed over my plain black shirt, watching this disaster unfold in my carefully designed space. The movers rushed around carelessly, oblivious to the value of their surroundings. I watched in silence as the metal leg of a cheap rental cocktail table scraped loudly across my imported Brazilian hardwood, leaving a deep scratch on the expensive finish. Porch. Another worker shoved a heavy catering cart into the freshly painted hallway wall, leaving a black scuff mark near the baseboard. The damage was cosmetic, something my professional maintenance crew could easily fix on Monday morning. But from a legal standpoint, those marks were absolute gold. Porch. I slid my phone out of my pocket and quietly snapped high-resolution photos of every scratch, scuff, and dent. I was compiling a detailed property damage claim. That invoice would be billed directly to Brittany, attached to her final eviction notice. Every damaged floorboard added another layer of legal liability for my corporate legal team to process. Porch. I logged the delivery truck's license plate and recorded the exact time of the damage. Just as the movers finished their chaotic setup, a sleek black town car pulled up to the main entrance. Brittany stepped out, looking like she was auditioning for a flashy reality show. She wore a tight white designer dress, a style from last season, and her fake cubic zirconia ring caught the light aggressively. Porch. She marched into the grand foyer holding a clipboard, looking around with the arrogant posture of an owner. She spotted me standing near the kitchen entrance, her face instantly twisting into deep annoyance. She stomped toward me, her thin heels clicking sharply against my hardwood floors. "Ruby!" Porch. "What on earth are you doing standing in the main hallway?" she snapped, her voice echoing through the foyer. "I explicitly told Mom you were not to be seen by anyone. Guests are arriving in less than 2 hours, and I won't have you lingering around the front door bringing down the tone of this place." I kept my face completely blank, putting on a quiet, submissive mask. "Lurch. I was just checking on the movers," I said softly, mimicking hesitation. "They scratched the hallway floor when they brought the couch in. I know how much this beautiful home means to you and your future husband." Brittany let out a dramatic sigh and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "It's just a tiny scratch. Lurch. Harrison will have his private maintenance team fix it tomorrow. When you own a $12 million home, you don't stress over tiny details like that. Though I suppose a struggling house cleaner, like you, panics over every little thing. You probably freak out if you break a vacuum." She looked me up and down, taking in my plain black shirt and trousers, letting out a condescending sneer. "Lurch. At least you listened for once and dressed appropriately for help," she muttered, crossing her arms. "Now listen closely. When Harrison and his family arrive, you stay in the kitchen until it's time to serve the appetizers. You carry the trays quietly. You do not speak to my guests unless spoken to. And you do not mention your pathetic life to anyone. Lurch. If anyone asks, you're just hired help for the evening. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly, keeping eye contact just long enough to project obedience. "I understand completely, Brittany," I said. "I'm just here to carry the trays. I'll stay out of your sight and make sure your special day is perfect." "Lurch." "Good," she cut in sharply, turning to inspect a huge, gaudy floral arrangement on the kitchen island. "From now on, use the rear service entrance. I don't want you tracking dirt through my front door. I need this estate looking flawless before Harrison gets here." I turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving her arrogant orders behind. "Lurch." I stepped into the busy prep area, where Marco was expertly arranging delicate caviar tartlets on silver platters. He looked up, raising an eyebrow. He had overheard the entire exchange from the other room. I simply smiled at him, picked up a polishing cloth, and began wiping down a silver tray. "Lurch." My sister thought she had firmly established her dominance, putting me right where she believed I belonged. She had no idea she was just a temporary trespasser in my world, and her illusion was about to come to a sudden end. The hidden high-definition cameras in the ceiling captured every single word, recording her arrogance for the dramatic climax that was rapidly approaching. "Lurch." The heavy oak service door clicked shut behind me, blocking out the sound of Brittany shouting orders at the movers outside. I picked up a silver polishing cloth, standing at the edge of the large kitchen island, blending seamlessly into the background. "Lurch." About 30 minutes passed in a steady, efficient rhythm before the distinct crunch of heavy tires on the gravel driveway announced my parents' arrival. I heard the front door open, followed immediately by my mother Patricia, letting out a dramatic gasp that echoed all the way down the long hallway. "Lurch." I shifted slightly toward the edge of the kitchen, positioning myself to watch their entry without attracting attention. Patricia and Richard stood in the grand foyer, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. They stared up at the 20-foot ceilings, the imported crystal chandelier I had personally commissioned from a designer in Milan, and the sweeping double staircase. "Lurch." My father even took off his suit jacket, clutching it tightly in his hands. He turned in a slow circle, visibly overwhelmed by the incredible wealth surrounding him. "Oh my word, Richard," Patricia breathed, her voice trembling with awe. "I always knew Harrison was successful, but this is magnificent. This is a true legacy estate." "Lurch." Brittany walked out from the formal dining room, smiling like a queen greeting her subjects. She opened her arms and pulled our parents into an exaggerated group hug. "Welcome to my new home," she declared, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Harrison told me I could pick whichever house I wanted. He handled all the paperwork and wire transfers." "Do you love it?" "Lurch." Patricia pulled back, gripping Brittany's shoulders and staring at her like she had hung the moon. "Love isn't the word, sweetie," Patricia gushed. "You've completely outdone yourself. The architecture, the natural light, It fits your status perfectly. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. The irony was almost overwhelming. Porch. The architecture fit her, of course, because I was the one who spent 6 grueling months agonizing over blueprint redraws, tearing down interior walls, and fighting endless battles with city planners just to maximize the natural light through those exact windows. Before Brittany stole my security code, she didn't even know what this zip code represented. Porch. Richard stepped forward, kissing Brittany on the cheek, his chest practically swelling with an uncontrollable sense of pride. You played your cards to sheer perfection, young lady. His voice boomed across the entry hall. You secured a man who truly knows how to provide staggering wealth. This is the exact, luxurious life your mother and I envisioned for you. Porch. You've set an insurmountable standard for this family. Inside the kitchen, it was a busy, perfectly controlled sanctuary. Marco, my executive chef, handed me a spotless silver tray arrayed with delicate caviar blinis and handcrafted tartlets. I reached down to smooth my plain black apron, ensuring it sat flat against my dark shirt. Porch. Just then, the heavy brass doorbell chimed through the foyer, marking the official arrival of the evening's guests of honor. I waited a deliberate moment in the kitchen, giving them plenty of time to assemble inside, before stepping through the dining room doors with the tray in hand, blending quietly into the shadows near the entrance. Porch. Loud, almost intentionally projected laughter echoed through the foyer. Harrison had finally arrived, and he had brought his parents. I stood holding the silver tray like a silent statue near the wide archway leading into the main living room. Harrison looked exactly as my corporate intelligence team had described him in the 50-page dossier. Porch. He wore a designer suit, but anyone with a trained eye could tell it was off the rack rather than bespoke. The shoulders pulled slightly too tight. The classic sign of someone maxing out credit cards on store-rack designer gear to keep up appearances. He looked exhausted. Porch. His eyes darted nervously around the massive foyer, taking in the 20-foot ceilings and imported crystal chandelier with a mix of greed and quiet awe. He was trying desperately to project the relaxed confidence of a successful tech founder, but his tight jawline and subtle, hard swallows betrayed his sheer panic. He genuinely believed my sister had paid full cash for this $12 million home. Porch. Stepping into the house right behind him was his mother, Sylvia. She was a tall, imposing woman draped in a heavy mink coat. In an era where faux fur and sustainability dominated, the coat felt less like a fashion choice and more like a desperate, mothball-scented attempt to broadcast old money prestige. Porch. The moment Sylvia crossed the threshold, her sharp eyes began scanning every single architectural detail. She wasn't impressed by the grandeur. Instead, her gaze held a hungry, calculating gleam. Her husband stood quietly behind her, completely detached from the social spectacle, acting as little more than a backdrop to his wife's aggressive presence. Porch. Brittany rushed forward on her high heels, her thin stilettos clicking loudly on my imported hardwood floors. She threw her arms around Harrison's neck, landing a dramatic kiss on his cheek. "Welcome to our new home, babe," she announced loudly, intentionally projecting her voice, so my parents in the living room wouldn't miss a word. Porch. "I know you're going to absolutely love the furniture setup I picked out for tonight." Harrison swallowed hard, his eyes briefly sweeping across the cheap, white faux leather rental couches sitting on my spotless floors. "It looks incredibly expensive, Brittany." He forced a rigid smile, his voice tight. Porch. Sylvia kept the heavy mink coat draped over her shoulders as she casually shoved her designer handbag toward my father. Richard took it awkwardly, considering Brittany hadn't bothered to hire an actual coat check attendant. "The square footage is certainly adequate," Sylvia remarked, running a critical finger along the edge of my custom mahogany entry table. Porch. Though maintaining a property of this scale requires a very specific generational level of family wealth. I certainly hope your family understands the immense financial burden of owning an estate like this, Richard. My father immediately squared his shoulders, swallowing the vanity bait without hesitation. Torch. Oh, we understand completely, Sylvia, he declared with a booming, artificial confidence. Our family has always believed in the power of substantial real estate investments. We couldn't be prouder of Brittany and the high standard of living she has achieved. I took a measured step forward, keeping my chin slightly lowered as I presented the silver tray of appetizers to the group. Arch. Sylvia's eyes passed right through me, treating me like an invisible piece of furniture. Without a word of thanks, she arrogantly snatched a caviar blini from the tray. Harrison reached out for one as well, his hand trembling slightly. I turned smoothly, offering the tray to my sister. Brittany shot me a sharp, silent glare, dripping with implicit hostility, before delicately selecting a tartlet. Orch. I slipped away quietly, beginning my rounds through the steady stream of guests now pouring through the front doors. The living room filled quickly with high-pitched chatter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and a dense cloud of expensive perfumes. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, lingering near the edges of the room where the acoustic design allowed me to catch almost every conversation. Orch. About an hour into the party, I noticed Sylvia cornering my mother near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the infinity pool. Patricia was clutching a glass of white wine, so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. Richard stood beside her, looking uncharacteristically tense. I quietly approached a nearby side table, pretending to meticulously arrange a stack of white cocktail napkins. Orch. The view really is lovely, Sylvia said, gesturing vaguely toward the dark, rolling expanse of Lake Michigan. Harrison mentioned your family holds a fairly substantial real estate portfolio here in Chicago. Patricia let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh that grated against my ears. We do quite well for ourselves, she replied, forcing a bright, plastic smile. Orch. Richard has worked endlessly to provide a very comfortable, luxurious life for our daughters. Sylvia took a slow, deliberate sip from her glass, locking her eyes onto my mother like a guided missile. Orch. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you, Patricia. Sylvia's tone dropped into a conspiratorial lower registers, quiet enough for an intimate circle, but perfectly audible from where I stood. Harrison is a brilliant businessman, and his venture capital projects are highly innovative. But as you know, the tech sector can be volatile. Orch. Richard shifted his weight uncomfortably, loosening his tie. Every industry has its cycles, Sylvia. Of course, but Harrison is currently navigating a minor corporate restructuring. Sylvia continued, maintaining a polished demeanor while laying down heavy, undeniable pressure. Nothing serious, merely a brief liquidity matter. Orch. He has a few outstanding business liabilities that need to be cleared before the wedding. She paused, taking another slow sip. It's only $300,000. A drop in the bucket for a family capable of casually buying a $12 million lakefront estate for cash. I stopped arranging the napkins, holding my breath. Orch. Sylvia was blatantly asking my parents to cover Harrison's mountain of secret debt. She operated under the assumption that, since Brittany boasted about buying a multi-million-dollar home, my parents were sitting on a massive fortune. All the color drained from Patricia's face. Her bright artificial smile vanished instantly. $300,000? She repeated, her voice dropping to a raspy whisper. Sylvia gave a smooth, practiced nod, leaning in slightly. We firmly believe that when two prominent families unite, their financial assets should align as well. Think of it as a gesture of good faith from your side. Since Brittany brought this magnificent property to the marriage, it only makes logical sense for your family Osadi to settle Harrison's minor liabilities, so they can start with a clean slate. I'm sure Richard can write a check tomorrow morning and resolve it entirely. Richard's massive, fragile ego would never allow him to admit financial weakness in front of a woman he viewed as elite old money. He couldn't bear to look cheap in front of Harrison's wealthy family, nor could he afford to shatter the illusion Brittany had built. Richard cleared his throat, pulling at his collar. He looked physically ill, yet he managed to force a tight, strained smile. "Well, Sylvia," he stammered, his usual booming tone completely stripped away. "Corporate restructurings are quite common. George, we can certainly sit down soon to discuss the financial details of the wedding. We always take care of our own." Patricia looked at her husband with sheer panic in her eyes. She knew they didn't have that kind of liquid cash. She knew they were trapped in a corner. But she also knew that if they refused, Sylvia would realize they weren't the ultra-wealthy family Brittany had claimed. George. The engagement party would fall apart, and their connection to Harrison's high society circle would evaporate. Sylvia smiled, a cold, triumphant expression settling over her features. "I'm so glad we're on the same page, Richard." She patted his arm patronizingly. "Harrison will be so relieved to know his new family is stepping up. George, I'll have his accountant send over the exact figures on Monday morning." She turned and strutted away, leaving my parents alone by the window. Patricia turned to Richard, grabbing his arm in a panic. "Richard, what are we going to do?" She hissed under her breath, trembling with fear. "We don't have that kind of cash sitting around. George, if we try to take out a second mortgage on our house, the bank will raise flags." "Keep your voice down," Richard snapped nervously, looking around. "We'll figure it out, Patricia. We have to. If we don't cover this debt, his mother will ruin Brittany's reputation in their circle. We can't let our daughter lose a man like Harrison over a short-term cash flow issue. George, we'll take an early withdrawal from your 401(k) if we have to." I picked up my silver tray and moved slowly back toward the kitchen, my heart thumping with a cold, intense satisfaction. They were actively plotting to drain their own retirement savings, to pay off a broke scammer, all to maintain a pathetic illusion built inside a stolen home. George. The lies were stacking on top of each other, creating a heavy, suffocating trap that they were blindly jumping into. Blinded by greed and social desperation, they couldn't see the cliff they were sprinting toward. I pushed through the oak service door and set the tray down on the marble island, taking a deep breath of clean air. George. The party was just getting started, and the main course was still waiting in the wings. I picked up a heavy silver tray, loaded with champagne flutes from the counter, and smoothed my black apron one last time. Marco gave me an encouraging nod before turning back to his work. I pushed open the swinging door and re-entered the sprawling main living area. The party had reached its peak. George. The noise level had risen to a steady, buzzing hum, filled with overlapping chatter and the clinking of glassware. The room was packed with people in expensive evening wear, each working hard to impress one another. Harrison had invited dozens of his supposed high society friends and business associates, who mixed awkwardly with my parents and their suburban country club acquaintances. George. The contrast between the grand architecture I had designed and the cheap rental furniture Brittany had brought in was even more glaring with the room full of people. I glided smoothly through the crowd, expertly keeping the silver tray balanced. Nobody paid attention to the woman in the plain black uniform carrying drinks. George. To these guests, who measured human value solely by designer labels and bank balances, I was completely invisible. Which was precisely what I needed. I wove between small groups, offering crystal flutes of champagne while listening closely to the conversations around me. The density of deception in the air was almost suffocating. George. I heard Harrison boasting to a group of older men about his latest venture capital acquisition, tossing out fake financial figures I knew for a fact didn't exist. I saw my father standing near the massive fireplace, laughing loudly at a joke, to ensure everyone knew he was the proud patriarch of this successful family. George. He looked completely relaxed, hiding the sheer panic he had felt just moments ago over the $300,000 debt Sylvia had dumped on him. I wove my way toward the center of the room, where the largest crowd had gathered. Brittany was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, presiding over the room like a reigning monarch. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and gestured dramatically with the other, making sure her fake cubic zirconia ring caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above. She was surrounded by Harrison, his parents, and several women I recognized as her real estate colleagues. They all stared at her with varying degrees of envy and awe. I stepped quietly behind the group, offering the tray to a man standing on the edge. Keeping my head down, I listened intently to every word my sister spoke. Brittany took an elegant sip of her drink and sighed happily. Yes, we looked at dozens of properties before deciding to build this place from scratch. She lied, her voice easily cutting through the ambient noise. Harrison was focused on the location, of course, but I took full control of the design process. I wanted the architecture to feel modern, yet warm and inviting. Sylvia raised an eyebrow, looking around the room. You designed this estate yourself, Brittany? I must say, that's an ambitious undertaking for someone without formal architectural training. Oh, I worked very closely with the contractors, Brittany replied smoothly, not missing a beat in her rehearsed performance. Take these floors, for instance. I flew down to Brazil personally to hand-select this specific hardwood. I insisted the grain alignment match the flow of natural light from the windows. And the floating staircase in the foyer was entirely my concept. The builders told me it was structurally impossible at first, but I refused to take no for an answer. I made them tear it down and rebuild it twice until it matched my vision. I stood behind her like a statue, my hands gripping the edges of the silver tray, so hard my knuckles turned white. It took an immense amount of self-control to keep my face completely blank. I was the one who spent 3 grueling weeks in agonizing international calls negotiating with Brazilian timber suppliers for that specific hardwood. I was the one who sat in a dusty construction trailer for 6 hours, arguing heatedly with structural engineers to ensure the floating staircase was safe. I had poured my heart, soul, and massive capital into every single inch of this property. Listening to her stand in the middle of my living room and casually claim my exhausting work as her own was infuriating, but it also served as fuel for the fire I was about to ignite. Her real estate colleagues offered polite, impressed murmurings, thoroughly intimidated by her alleged wealth and influence. Harrison wrapped his arm around her waist, looking at her with a mix of pride and desperate relief. He believed her lie completely. Looking at this $12 million home, he saw his ultimate salvation from bankruptcy. Brittany turned slightly to answer another guest, and her eyes locked onto me, standing silently a few feet away. For a brief second, genuine irritation flashed across her face. She hated seeing me there, even in the humble uniform she had forced upon me. My presence was a constant reminder of the messy reality she was trying to escape. Then her expression shifted. The annoyance faded, replaced by a malicious, calculating gleam. She realized I wasn't just a nuisance. I was the perfect contrast for her grand performance. She waved her hand aggressively in my direction, signaling me to step forward. "Oh, Ruby, come here for a second," she called out, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. I stepped into the center of the wealthy circle, keeping my eyes lowered as I presented the tray of champagne. My heart beat steadily under my ribs. I knew exactly what she was trying to do, and I was more than happy to let her dig the hole deeper. "Everyone," Brittany pointed her champagne glass at me. "I'd love to introduce my sister, Ruby." The guests turned their attention toward me, their eyes scanning my plain black uniform and simple bun. Sylvia looked at me with a mix of confusion and disgust, clearly wondering why the bride's sister looked like a hired catering server. Brittany let out a soft, dramatic sigh, placing a hand over her heart in a display of fake concern. "Ruby has had a very difficult time finding her footing in the world," she explained to the captive audience. "She's always struggled to maintain a stable career. Porch. Right now, she runs a tiny cleaning business in the city. It's honest manual labor, but it barely pays anything. So when I realized she was struggling to cover her rent again this month, I couldn't just stand by. I had to step in and help. She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture so fake it almost made me recoil. Porch. So, I decided to hire her to handle the appetizers for tonight's party, Brittany continued, beaming at the crowd. I firmly believe that when you are blessed with success and wealth, it is your responsibility to lift up family members who aren't as fortunate. Family is everything, after all. A murmur of sympathetic approval rippled through the group. Porch. Several wealthy women cast pitying looks in my direction. Harrison smiled proudly at Brittany, captivated by her incredible generosity. My mother had joined the group by now, nodding solemnly, fully endorsing the humiliating narrative. I didn't say a word in my defense. I stayed in character. I looked up at Brittany, offering a small, submissive smile. Porch. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Brittany, I said softly. I really appreciate you letting me work in your beautiful new home tonight. Brittany practically glowed, soaking in the satisfaction of my public submission. It's my pleasure, Ruby, she said, turning back to her audience. Porch. Now, why don't you head back to the kitchen and check if the chef needs help washing those appetizer plates? We need to ensure the catering remains flawless for the rest of the evening. I bowed my head slightly, turned, and carried my silver tray back through the crowded room. As I walked away, I could feel their condescending gazes burning into my back. Porch. They were whispering about the pathetic, struggling sister who had to serve drinks at her sister's engagement party, just to make rent. They marveled at Brittany's immense wealth and her big, charitable heart. I pushed through the oak service door and returned to the quiet safety of the kitchen, setting the tray on the marble counter and taking a deep breath. Porch. The tension in the living room was building toward a boiling point. The lies were stacked high, and the entire structure was dangerously unstable. Brittany had publicly claimed ownership of my house, my design work, and my capital. To boost her own fragile ego, she had humiliated me in front of 50 strangers. She had built her own gallows with absolute precision. Porch. I looked up at the tiny black circle hidden in the crown molding above the refrigerator, the security camera Michael had installed. The red recording light was invisible, but I knew it was capturing every frame of this grand disaster. I adjusted my black apron and picked up another tray of delicate tartlets. The party was reaching its peak, and the trap was fully set. Porch. I was ready for the final, inevitable showdown. I left the kitchen island carrying a fresh silver tray loaded with crystal water glasses and expensive red wine. The heavy oak door gave a soft sigh as I pushed it open, stepping back into the vast main living area. The party had reached the point where alcohol began to loosen tongues, and the laughter rang a few decibels louder. Porch. Over 50 guests were scattered across the expensive imported rugs, completely unaware that they were standing in a high-security monitoring zone. I glided through the crowd like a ghost, keeping my posture neutral. The plain black uniform was my ultimate camouflage, rendering me invisible to people who measured human worth solely by designer labels and bank balances. Porch. I scanned the room, quickly spotting my primary targets. Sylvia was standing near the grand piano, holding a glass of deep red wine. Harrison and my sister were flanking her, engaged in a lively conversation with two other wealthy-looking couples. My parents hovered a few feet away, beaming with pride as Brittany effortlessly played the role of a generous hostess. Porch. I adjusted my grip on the tray and moved slowly toward them, letting the noise of the party wash over me. The trap was set, but it needed a catalyst to spring shut. I was about to provide it. As I drew closer, I could hear Sylvia talking in her loud, aristocratic drawl, complaining about poor service at a charity gala she had attended last week. Porch. Brittany was nodding enthusiastically, desperate to mirror her future mother-in-law to secure her approval. Harrison stood beside them, his cheeks slightly flushed, likely calculating how many more dangerous lies he'd have to tell before the night was over. I stepped into the edge of their circle, waiting for a natural pause in the conversation before offering the tray. Porch. Sylvia glanced my way, her eyes immediately narrowing with sharp judgment. She remembered exactly who I was from Brittany's humiliating introduction earlier. To her, I wasn't just a nameless server anymore. I was a pathetic, struggling sister whose presence was a stain on the wealthy image the family was trying to project. Porch. Sylvia looked down at my plain black uniform, then up at my face, her eyes flashing with a cruel, mocking gleam. She saw a golden opportunity to assert her dominance and prove her superiority to the group. I held the tray steady, offering the drink selections with a quiet, submissive expression. "Would anyone care for a refreshment?" I asked, my voice carefully modulated to sound timid. Porch. Sylvia took a step forward, her heavy mink coat brushing against my arm. She looked down at the tray and let out a long, dramatic sigh of disappointment. "It is simply impossible to find competent help these days," she announced loudly, ensuring the surrounding guests could hear her disdain. Porch. "One would think that since you are a family member, you would at least attempt to perform your serving duties with basic grace." She reached out her right hand, pretending to grab a glass of sparkling water from the far side of the tray. In her left hand, she held her nearly full glass of expensive red wine. As she leaned forward, she intentionally tilted her left wrist. It wasn't an accident. Porch. It wasn't a clumsy mistake, it was a precise, deliberate act of malice. The deep red liquid spilled over the rim of the crystal glass, splashing heavily across the front of my plain black shirt. The wine soaked into the cotton fabric, spreading into a dark, ugly stain across my chest, and dripping down onto my black trousers. Porch. A few drops splashed onto the polished Brazilian hardwood floors right beside my shoes. A collective gasp rippled through the circle. The surrounding conversations cut off instantly as guests turned to stare at the scene. I froze, feeling the cold, wet wine soak through my clothes and press against my skin. I didn't drop the silver tray. I didn't flinch or yell. Porch. I stood completely still, absorbing the impact of her petty physical aggression. "Oh, look at what you've done! You clumsy girl!" Sylvia immediately barked, skillfully flipping the narrative to make herself the victim. "You bumped right into my arm. You are completely incompetent." She took a dramatic step back, patting down her spotless coat, even though not a single drop had touched her. Porch. This is precisely what happens when you rely on charity cases instead of hiring trained professionals. She pointed a manicured finger at the drops of wine glistening on the hardwood floor. "Clean that up immediately before it stains the wood," she ordered, her sharp voice echoing in the dead silence of the living room. "Then get back to the kitchen and fix that disgusting mess. Porch, you are an absolute embarrassment to your sister and her beautiful home." The silence in the room was deafening. Over 50 wealthy guests stared at me, waiting to see how the struggling, pathetic sister would handle such a public humiliation. My parents stood frozen in horror, terrified this incident would ruin their standing with Harrison's old money family. Porch. I looked down at the dark red stain covering my chest. Then I raised my head, looking directly into Sylvia's arrogant, triumphant eyes. I didn't apologize. I didn't drop to my knees to scrub the floor. Slowly and deliberately, I placed the heavy silver tray onto a nearby side table. I didn't utter a single loud word. Porch. I unlocked my screen, brought up Pinnacle Estate Holdings' secure cloud surveillance portal, and mirrored the high-definition video output straight to the 75-inch smart television mounted above the living room fireplace. The massive display flickered to life. Crystal clear, unedited, full HD video with pristine spatial audio filled the room. Porch. The initial playback showed Brittany, dated 3 weeks prior at 11:45 p.m., walking through the front entrance, typing in a temporary broker lockbox code. The audio picked up her laugh as she bragged on speakerphone to a friend. "Harrison thinks I'm a high-flying millionaire agent, and my clueless parents believe he bought this with cash. Orch. Neither of them knows I'm squatting in a vacant corporate listing using stolen access codes. The room gasped as the video auto-scrubbed through time-stamped footage showing Brittany hauling in cheap, discounted rental furniture, scratching the hardwood floors, and hosting unauthorized late-night parties while sipping wine over my imported Italian marble. Orch. The camera then cut to live multi-angle coverage, showing every terrified, pale face currently standing in the living room in real time. Sylvia let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her mouth as she stared at the screen, then turned her fury directly onto Harrison. "You absolute idiot! You brought us into a house of squatter fraud?" Harrison's face crumpled. Orch. He backed away from Brittany as if she were toxic, screaming back at his mother. "I don't have $12 million. My business went under last year. I'm $300,000 in debt. She told me she was a wealthy real estate heiress who was going to pay off my creditors." The realization hit the room like a thunderbolt. Orch. They were two broke, desperate frauds who had mutually scammed each other, using my property as their battleground. Patricia dropped to her knees right on the damaged floor, her eyes wide with uncontainable terror as she looked up at me. Ruby, please, this can't be real. You can't do this to your family." Orch. Richard stood frozen, his face flushed purple, utterly crushed under the undeniable weight of his ruined vanity, and the realization that the daughter he cast out into a blizzard had become the sole ruler of an empire. "Michael," I said calmly, turning my back on my weeping family and addressing my security director. "Yes, Ms. Ruby," Michael replied, stepping forward with absolute authority. Orch. "Execute immediate trespass removals for Brittany and her party," I ordered smoothly, my voice echoing through the silent, ruined event. "Compile every scratch, every damaged wall, and every hour of unauthorized entry into a formal police report for felony commercial trespassing, breaking and entering, and corporate property destruction." Orch. "Have our legal counsel file civil damages against Brittany immediately." "Right away, ma'am," Michael said, signaling his security detail waiting outside the main entrance. Within seconds, uniformed guards stepped into the grand foyer. I picked up my silver tray, smoothed my black shirt, darkened by wine, yet radiating absolute victory, and began walking toward the private rear service exit. Orch. I didn't look back at the chaotic screaming, the frantic tears, or the total collapse of their hollow world behind me. 13 years ago, they threw me out into the Chicago cold with $50 and a broken heart. Tonight, I stepped out into the crisp night air, completely whole, entirely independent, and firmly in control of everything I built.